What in the world did I read last week? It is time to share my weekly reading and what I read last week. And it was another good week of reading. I actually read 4 books. 2 of them, again, were nonfiction. 2 of them were fiction, and I read them all digitally. The first book was the book Ultra Processed People. And I actually had picked this up and it was in my to be read file, and I moved it to the top of the stack because I was watching a YouTube video and saw an interview with a doctor who had actually decided to eat a highly processed diet for a month. And I watched it and it was so fascinating. So I knew that this book was already in my stack. So I went ahead and moved it to the top and read it. And oh my word, it blew my mind. Number one, the video and the interview that I saw online, it was the same doctor that wrote the book. What are the odds? But this book is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because this author is talking about what they are doing to our food. What in the world? They are doing crazy things to our food. All of those items that you can't read and don't know how to say the words, that is a processed food that was taken sometimes from bacteria, from food that was meant for animals, and it is processed and cleaned and bleached. And then they add flavoring to make it taste like the food that we think we're getting. It was eye-opening because what he says this food is made out of is craziness. Absolute craziness. And it made me actually start looking at labels a little bit more carefully. I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to ruin it for you, but this book was an eye-opener. It was an amazing read. It made me change how I'm thinking about the food that I'm putting in my body. I gave this a 4 out of 5. It was that powerful for me. Highly, highly, highly recommend this one. The next book I read was Fat Chance by Julie Haddon. Riding high on my success from the Fat Family, Fit Family that I read last week. I'll put the link up there. And so I was looking for another book, and I actually came across the book Fat Chance by Julie Haddon. It was another Biggest Loser contestant, and you know, as I said last week, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I wasn't sure I wanted to read it, but last week I did really, really good, and I liked the book that I read last week. So riding high on that success, I picked up this book. Once again, the book shocked me. This book does not touch very much at all on Julie's experience with The Biggest Loser. Yeah, sure, she shares some of her stories from it, but this story is more about her emotional and mental journey toward health. She talks about worthiness a lot. And it was actually a really good book. It actually really made me think. She brought up the emotional journey, which I think anybody that has ever been on a weight loss journey has to deal with. And this is what that book was about. Now, the book, I actually gave it a little bit of a lower rating at 2. Not because of the subject matter. The subject matter was spot on. Where I struggled with was the layout. It was not laid out chronologically, and the chapters just really didn't make sense. It seemed like it was all over the place in time frame, in thoughts, in concepts. It just seemed woo. So for that reason, it got a bit of a lower ranking. However, the concept and the message in the book was awesome. The only other thing about the book that I will caution people is that she's very, very into her spirituality and religion. And a lot of the book did read as more along the lines of a devotional. She would talk about, well, I'm going through this emotionally, so I just kept focusing on this scripture. And then she would go 3 pages about that scripture or that song. And they were, you know, all very spiritual. It is still a good book, even though it got a little bit of a lower rating. So that is my nonfiction. Let's move on to the fiction side of what I read. The next book was by Louise Douglas, and it's The Room in the Attic. This book actually takes 3 time eras: current day, 1990s, and turn of the century at 1900, 1905, give or take. And it tells 3 different stories about the time frame at this one building. In the early 1900s, it was an insane asylum. In 1995, it was a boys' boarding school. And in the current date, it was an abandoned building that they were looking to rejuvenate. So you actually hear a story about what was happening at the insane asylum, and then you would hear a story about how life was in 1995. And eventually they did merge. The book was actually a really good read. I actually really enjoyed the stories. It was actually very, very neat to hear all of the stories of how life was at each different place, and to step into the insane asylum, to step into the very, very strict boarding school. It was neat to step into those eras, to step into those experiences. Where my problem came with the book is that it was a little bit supernatural, and I struggle with things that are more supernatural, more sci-fi. So the whole way through the beginning of the book, I was like 100% into it. And then at the very end, when they pull out this supernatural stuff, I was like, really? Yeah. Ruined it. I understand that they did it because that's what pulled it together. The whole supernatural thing just kind of didn't work for me. So it started high, ended low for me. Still was a good read, just not one of my favorites because of the subject and how it ended. The last book I read for the week was Lean on Me by Beth Moran. And this was just a nice, light, easy read. It is about a gal who is living her life. She is struggling on the verge of poverty, and she has made decisions in her life that are leading her to where she's going in life. And she stumbles upon a church choir, and she joins the church choir. Kind of interesting, but she joins the church choir. And in joining the church choir, she develops friendships with ladies who are amazing. They show her what the true meaning of friendship is, the true meaning of love. And this choir also teaches the value of oneself and one's self-worth. Throughout the whole learning of this, she of course is dealing with the angst and meeting new people and kind of falling in love and falling out of love, whatever you want to say. It was a good, light, easy read. Highly recommend it. It's one of those books that you're going to fly through. It was well written. It is well laid out. And it is just a good feel-good because it ends happy. So there you have it, the 4 books that I read last week and my recommendations. I am so happy to take you along on my reading adventures. If you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments below what you think of them. Happy reading.